Greetings and salutations. You are listening to the Into the North podcast, where we take a look at the competitive side of the Commander format, also known as CEDH. I'm one of your hosts, Lyndon, aka Noobzors, and today I'm joined by my co-hosts, Matt, aka Null.
Hey.
Reed, aka Sick Robot.
How you doing?
And Morgan, aka Spleenface.
What's up, everybody?
And in this episode, we're going to be covering... it's a variety pack, actually. We're going to be covering a couple things. So
bit
this
of an
week...
anticlimax, but...
this week, Morgan and myself each brought a mini topic, and then in our next variety pack, Matt and Reed are going to be picking a topic, a mini topic each. Yeah. But before we get into that, what have you guys been up to since the last episode?
I played Magic in a while.
I would like, but enough.
Yeah.
I've actually been playing a lot more games.
That's incredible to me.
Yeah. Normally, I've been on a bit of a CDH hiatus for a bit, but got back into it to test a new deck that I've been working on. When I do work on decks, and this is something like some listeners mentioned me about the the Golos deck, and I said I'll post the list when I have like a primer for it. I take forever to get like decks and stuff done, so be warned. But right now I'm testing a Brawl list, version of Brawl that I've been working on for a while in the background, and it's going well so far. Having a lot of fun with it, winning.
Nobody else is having fun. Just
Yeah, that's kind of the nature of Brawl. But honestly, and looking at Strixhaven and some of these new cards gets me even more excited to be playing Brawl.
Yeah. You'll know the deck is good when you go to the Not So Humble Brags channel and you see a bunch of Time Spell remastered foils from Lyndon. You'll know the deck is good.
I did already order my Time Spell remastered foil.
God.
Oh no!
Oh my god!
Sorry to spoil it, but
Yeah. That's it for me. Matt, Morgan.
I moved.
I've just been...
I don't know.
That is true.
Yeah.
Some might say you've moved up in the world.
Yeah, I have gone up. Was it 8 stories? So
Nice.
currently at the height. But then I look outside and I'm like halfway up on another building that's like clearly taller than this one.
That's just gonna be your driving motivation. Just as long as there's any building that you can see that you're not taller than.
I mean,
you just gotta keep going up.
Couldn't you see the CN tower?
Yeah,
out
you
your
could.
window?
I can still
don't know
see
what
the
to say,
scene.
man.
Well, I don't know what a story technically counts. We'll go
There's
flights.
only one meaningful story.
Can you guys?
Yeah.
Can you still see the depressed faces of the people on the gardener from your window?
I can, but also, better yet, I can't hear them.
Nice,
I don't know what
nice.
changed, but I can't hear them, and that is definitely what was intended. So, happy about that.
Nice. And Morgan, anything from you? Or are we gonna wait until new developments
not a
to
whole
discuss that? Yeah. Okay. Okay then. Without further ado, let's jump into housekeeping. And as always in housekeeping, we like to give a shout out to our new patrons. So big shout outs to Jesse B,
Andrew C,
Mads B, especially from Tier 1 Con fame. Thank you.
And Kevin S.
you
Y'all
rock.
Yeah, I like to throw in the y'all.
Y'all
Yeah.
are great.
Yeah.
Shake it up.
Thank you so much, guys.
We really live on the
You're,
edge here at Into the North podcast.
You guys really help support the show, as we mention every week, or every episode, not every week. Every episode in our closing remarks. It really helps us a lot. And also, thanks to Mads B for basically forcing me into playing the Tier 1 Con.
Press-ganging you.
That segues us into new developments. So a couple things. The final Tier 1 Con tournament, which has been a
online event.
a multi-part series of online webcam tournaments. The final one of the tournaments is going to be happening in April. I think April 27th.
April 24th.
4th?
Fourth?
Okay,
I thought
cool.
it was sixth. Okay, we were all wrong there.
It's
Fourth.
somewhere around there, okay?
Okay, we were all wrong. That's Definitely
April 27th is a Tuesday.
Hey,
yeah.
we all share responsibility for being incorrect here in this house.
Yeah,
It's not
so
in the notes, and when we said it before, I said April 24th.
no, catch me at the final tier 1 con. Maybe I'll be playing my new Baral deck and losing horribly.
Oh God, actually.
And you know what? Spoiler: there's a very real chance that we might have the entire Into the North crew there. So
Yeah.
keep your eye out.
Doctor's orders.
Hot.
Full Into the North finals. Let's go.
Oh,
If you guys
Could you
don't make it to
imagine?
the finals, I'm disappointed. We have
no,
to.
the thing is if
No,
it becomes 3 Into the North people in the finals versus someone else, it's going to be a repeat of the Canadian Commander Championships.
Oh yeah, we're screwed. There's no way. You know, if there's
It's
3 of us and
impossible,
1
yeah.
of somebody else, we might as well just concede.
Yeah.
Yeah. So Mads, if you're listening to this, this is your cue that if we all enter, and we all get into the semis, you have to put us in different pods.
Yeah, true.
One of us has to get auto pass to finals, and the other 3 play in the semis.
And speaking of tournaments, only the biggest CDH tournament in the history of CDH tournaments happened this past weekend. And that would be Marchesa. Is it just called the Marchesa tournament or like Marchesa 2?
I think
Or
it was Marchesa 2021.
Okay.
Occasionally referred to as Marchesa 2. There was a Marchesa last year. But yeah, this one was a big charity tournament. They raised, I think, almost $2,000 for Gamers Helping Gamers, which is pretty sweet.
Yeah, it's dope.
And there were 170 something people who showed up. and
Holy
played
moly.
games. We crashed Cockatrice only 3 times, and
Switched
your
to another
boy
server?
came out on top.
And just out of curiosity, Morgan, what deck did you play?
I played Razakats.
And did you get any other tournament finishes playing Razakats, by the way?
Yeah, back in January? It was either January or early February.
Was that the first tier 1 con? Did we already discuss
the
that?
first tier 1 con. Yes,
I think we did. Okay, yeah. Well, anyway, just wanted to reinforce that in our year in review episode, I'm pretty sure everyone on the cast said that Rule of Laws and Razakats, that kind of like strategy is the best thing going to the meta right now, and Morgan is out here proving us right. So, thanks
Yeah,
for that,
so
Morgan.
I'm going to take at least partial credit for all of your
At least,
Oh, yeah,
wins.
at least
of course.
90% of Morgan's
A part.
accomplishment or thanks. Yeah.
Honestly, it's every time it's a massive team effort because like I can't pull this off without just Reed salt to feed off, you know? It's like
Oh yeah, Reed, you did Marchesa as well, didn't
I
you?
did, yeah. And also, out of the 170 people playing, I think I had the 5th worst breakers in the entire tournament going into like
was wild.
trying to get
Yikes.
into semis, and I was tied with evereverybody up to 9th, I think.
and he came
With the
15th
brutal.
to be
And I
clear,
came
to
15th.
get into top
Yeah.
13.
Yeah, I was 15th, tied with, I think everybody up to 9th to get into top 13 with the 5th worst breakers in the tournament. Or, it was at least bottom 10 breakers in the tournament.
Yeah. I think
Yeah,
my
that's
breakers
good.
were pretty abysmal as well, but
You know,
know.
wins.
if you don't lose, then your opponents
Yeah,
can't win. So
Not bad.
Awesome.
It was definitely an experience watching myself go slide from like 8th to 15th over the course of the day.
But it was an even better experience listening to Reed slide from 8th
Oh yeah, no, 100%.
over
So
the course.
the highlight of that tournament for me was watching one of the games that could have kicked me out of top 13 be decided by the person that I needed to not win cast a Divergent Transformations, and then the other person casting a Chaos Warp not targeting one of the Divergent Transformations targets.
Yeah, he targeted something off the Elsha player's board to try and flip the Elsha into interaction for the Divergent Transformations.
Ooh. You know, that sounds like a kind of mistake that could happen if you were, overly tired or something, or if you really want help on how to do well in tournaments, be sure to check back in our previous episode where we
That being
talk
said,
about tournaments.
I personally think tournament fatigue in CDH is sort of bullshit.
Wait,
Quite
really?
honestly, yeah.
Why?
I just don't think it's a thing. Honestly,
You don't think
I
playing
find-
Magic for
thing.
you don't think
It's
playing Magic
absolutely
for
a
extended
thing.
periods
You're
of time?
just a times 10 CDH player, okay?
Yeah.
I guess
mean-
I don't know. I find myself typically getting sharper over a day worth of play. Like I tend to start out
What?
a tourney day rusty, and then
Oh,
like
that's true. It's because
sharpen
you
up
start
as I
out
keep
rusty,
playing.
and then the stimulants kick in, right?
oh yeah, that's the one. Yeah.
I mean, it's certainly there's certainly
Honestly, they
like,
should be drug checking CDH tournaments.
Yeah,
man.
the
This
PD
is-
cocktail really starts to kick in around round 3 usually.
I mean, I think that there's like a
Oh my
little bit of
God.
like your first game, especially if you start early, you're like just kind of
getting into
getting
the groove.
into it.
yeah.
But certainly like when you play for 10 plus hours, there's certainly a fatigue effect.
I mean, if you're playing continuously, sure. I think if you were playing for Marchesa and played every single possible time that you could queue up all the way into semis plus finals, like I could see that having an effect. But the fact that you can take breaks during Marchesa, especially with the fluid round structure, and I don't know, it's just like maybe it's also that I just find that a lot of decks tend to be pretty linear now, which doesn't really lend itself to fatigue that well.
Yeah, it definitely, certainly like some matches and some games contribute a lot more to fatigue than others. And like
Yeah.
you could play like a 5-round tournament and not really experience fatigue if you just had like several like quick simple games and then like a decently long break between each of them. Then
Yeah.
lots of people wouldn't be particularly fatigued by that. But like when you
Yeah.
play multiple, hour plus games, like I don't know, in the second tier 1 con, I remember my semi-final game, like it took like almost 2 hours, right? And then it's like, and then you're thrown into the final game, and like the other 2 finalists who had to play semifinals have been done for like half an hour plus, and like the person who finished first has literally just been like chilling for 2 hours, and then it's like, and go again. And like there's fatigue over 10 hours of play.
Yeah,
I mean, also
yeah.
those tournaments, like, you getting up at like 6 in the morning, that doesn't help. But
No, yeah,
I
specifically
accuse Reed of just
tier 1
talking
con
shit
stuff.
over here.
I don't know. Okay, no. Okay, no. It would be talking shit if Morgan didn't win the tournament, but since he did, it's not really talking shit. It's just an observation, I think. Okay, I'd say especially. I think the tournament fatigue is less of a conversation compared to like normal like GP play.
Okay.
I
Like
don't know
playing
that
like
I
if
agree.
you're going to like turn 2 or like day 2 at GP, like I feel like the tournament fatigue sets in a lot harder over.
I think it kind of
like
just
a
boils
full
down to
day
the end of the day.
IRL play plus like a second day with like when you usually
Well, sure,
don't
yeah,
have
It really
obviously,
just boils down to
right?
the amount of magic hours you have to put in and decision
Yeah, well,
making and
but
how
that-
tough the
that's-
deck is. Like,
That's why I was saying like for CDH, I think that tournament fatigue is just like a lot less of a factor than it is in
Well, but I think
when
that,
you're talking about like GP finals or something.
I mean, but I think that if you played like a full 2-day CDH tournament, especially if you had a lot of like hotly contested or like complex matches, I think that the fatigue would certainly.
well, anyway,
Sure, okay.
on to our mini topics for the show.
Wait, we also
debating whether or not tournament fatigue is real is surprisingly not actually
missed-
one of our mini
you
topics.
missed a new development though.
Did I miss a new development?
Yeah, the previous tier 1 con.
Oh, true. Yeah, I thought
Yeah,
I mentioned that
just,
because
like,
we
blazed
talked about
right
the one
past
in January, but there's been a few. That's right.
Yeah.
Morgan, go ahead. Talk about.
So, I got each of my podcast co-hosts to, tell me how much they really hated me and come up with a restriction for me to brew around, and then posted that and let people vote, and you all voted that I had to build around a companion that wasn't Gigantha, which was rough, and so I played Tazri, Beacon of Unity, and Zerda the Dawnwaker, and
Nice.
came second.
That sounds fun.
It wasn't. Zerda sounds fun until you start listing all the cards you can't play, and you're just like, oh right, all the good enchantments.
Dude, all companions sound fun until you realize you have to pay 3 to put them in your hand.
Yeah.
That was
dude,
definitely-
what a
the
rough-
the whole monolith combo thing is a lot worse when it costs like 6 to get Zerg into play rather than 3.
Yeah. Well, I guess this is the congratulations Morgan segment.
Yeah.
Congratulations
That's
Morgan.
my favorite segment.
It's been happening. It's been happening a lot recently,
I try not to give Morgan too much congratulations. I'm sure he gets enough of an ego boost from everyone else in the community. It's his job of his friends to knock him down a peg, right?
I feel like it's the the scene from Rick and Morty, like, yes, Jerry Smith, yes, like just shaking his own hand, wearing a shirt with his face on it.
So on to the mini topics. Morgan, your mini topic is first, and that is mana sequencing / mana overloading. Do you want to give us a brief kind of introduction on the idea behind this mini topic?
Yes. So I think there's a lot of discussion on like how to build a mana base, which lands you should be playing. But I think that what often gets looked over is then like how to actually play with the mana base that you have in a game. Primarily that has to do with fetch targets, but it can also just be like how you sequence which lands you're playing. And I think that there's some heuristics that people have like a very good grasp on, like, I want to be able to access all of my colors is like a very obvious thing. And like, generally people try not to keep hands where they can't generate one of the colors of their deck. And you go like, oh, I want as much blue as possible so I can represent multiple pieces of interaction or whatever. But I think that particularly in like the first 3 turns, people often do. They often like pick lands that, if you actually think about how the cards in your deck and how you're likely to want to play them, maybe aren't the best. So I guess we'll start with mana overloading, and essentially what that is when you have a land that taps, like, I'm assuming we're talking about lands that tap for 2 colors here generally.
Yeah. Because if you had a full mana base of 5, or like a handful of 5-color lands, none of this really applies.
It doesn't really matter. But assuming your lands tap for 2 mana, you need to think about like which colors you want to be generating when. So as an obvious example, green cards that cost green, a lot of them are permanents, and a lot of them can only be cast during your main phase. So, like, if you're playing, like, a bunch of mana dorks, and you have, Sylvan Library and Survival of the Fittest, like, yeah, you have, Veil of Summer, Nature's Claim, maybe Worldly Tutor, but generally, a lot of the green pips in your deck, you're only going to be able to use them at sorcery speed. Whereas something like blue, you have, like, all your counter spells. Yes, there's, like, Rhystic Study and Remora and Hull Breacher, but, a lot of your blue pips are going to be instants. If you fetch Tropical Island, which is a land that I see a lot of people fetch first, particularly in 4-color decks. Like, they fetch the Tropical Island because you're like, I want blue, but I want to play this mana dork. But what that means is that, like, on a later turn, if you want to cast something else that costs green, maybe it's Thrasios, or maybe it's like just another dork, or your Sylvan Library, or whatever, it means you have to tap your blue land in your main phase, which is generally not what you want to be doing. Whereas if you'd fetched, say, like Bayou, you could tap your Bayou and something else and cast Sylvan Library, and then hold up the Volcanic Island, and that represents Red Elemental Blast and Pyroblast if you're playing those, plus all of your 1-mana blue spells. And so essentially you just want to be considering which colors you're going to be using when, and then kind of putting colors that you're going to be using at the same time on the same land. So, as an example, if blue and red or I'll go back to Sans Red, because I think it's like more defined this way. If blue and white are the cards that you're generally going to be using at instant speed, and green and black are the things you're going to be playing at sorcery speed, then like Bayou Tundra is a split that makes a lot of sense, because whether you're casting a blue or a black spell, you still get to hold up. Or sorry, whether you're casting a green or a black spell, you still get to hold up your blue and white for your instant speed interaction.
So one thing you kind of brought up about like not getting Tropical Island because you want to split up the mana you're going to tap or whatever. One thing that I also do kind of want to consider or get your take on is getting Trop to play something like a Dork, because a lot of time that's what your turn 1 play is if you're playing green, right? And it's not always going to be a Birds of Paradise or Noble Hierarch. A lot of decks still do run, your 3 basic green dorks. So if you are playing one of those, does that factor into whether or not Misty is worth getting? Because you can then use your dork as the source of your, sorcery speed, tapping mana for those kinds of plays.
So yeah, it does, and obviously I'm not saying like never fetch Tropical Island, or like you shouldn't even have Tropical Island in your deck, considering like a lot of decks that are both blue and green. Probably Breeding Pool. Breeding Pool is probably less common than Watery Grave, but more common than anything else.
Yeah.
In decks that, I mean, maybe I guess Steam Vents. So yes, like obviously there are lots of hands where it'll work out fine. You're using your green land to get more green mana, and then it doesn't matter as much. But I still think generally, if you can avoid it, right? If you're looking at a hand with 2 fetch lands, it might make sense to go for something like a Bayou, especially if we can talk about this more when we talk about like being able to cast your 2 color cards conveniently. But especially if Bayou, like you're overloading, you have a bunch of 2 color cards that want green and black, which obviously there are a couple that are staples.
At least a couple, yeah.
At least a couple that are staples where, then you have that extra green source, so it's not as much of an issue. So yeah, like all of these things, again, I'm not saying never fetch Tropical Island, but I'm saying that like as a default, like I'm not really going to think about how this hand's playing out or like a heuristic. I think people default to Trop, and I think that that's often wrong.
Yeah, I definitely
especially because you're not holding up blue mana on turn 1 anyways. So, and if you're playing your second land on turn 2, like it doesn't really matter which of your land drops makes the blue mana.
Also, coincidentally, if you're on a deck that is both on Tropical Island and Tymna, Tropical Island is really bad as a turn 1 if you're trying to cast Tymna at some point in the future.
Unless your dork is Bop, Pilgrim, or Hierarch.
Yeah, so that's I think the second part of this is that you do really want to be careful when you're playing multicolored cards, that you can actually cast a lot of them reasonably. And like, sometimes you have to make a choice, because you can't fetch lands that let you cast, like assuming you just have 2 lands and 4 colors, you can't cast every 2 color combination spell by just fetching 2 lands. Like obviously it's literally impossible.
Triumphs are pretty great, but they don't do that much work.
Sure, but yeah, two color lands and 4 colors. There's going to be 2 color combinations that you can't cast.
Yeah.
Not being able to cast green-white spells is typically not a huge issue.
But it is something that
exactly
comes up.
Ladamri's call.
Yeah.
Blue-black is usually Limdal's Vault. The occasional deck runs Drown in the Lock.
Which is sort of
black,
coincidentally in that case also. That's actually sort of why UC is a great turn 1 fetch if you don't have immediate torque requirements as well, just because there's so few blue-black cards typically that you want to be like holding up specifically. Drown in the Lock doesn't see a whole lot of play, and Limdal's Vault is like yeah, it's something you want to hold up, but you can also like afford to cast in your upkeep and such, which means that like being able to centralize your blue and black mana on one land is pretty convenient, which is sort of why you see a lot of it fetched early. Anyway, continue. So I just wanted to insert that one.
I was gonna say Drown the Lock should see. I think that card is maybe seeing too little play right now, especially with all the creatures running about that are.
And like obviously, I'm using these as examples of
yeah.
Like, if you're playing
100%.
a bunch of blue-black spells, then sure.
Yeah, I mean, if you're on like Counter Squall and whatever, yeah, it's great.
And Notion Thief. Don't forget Notion.
Yeah, Notion Thief.
Notion Thief
but
is
I
a
mean,
bit of
when you're assuming you don't have like Soul Ring or Mana Crypt, typically you're not casting Notion Thief until you sort of have more sources of these colors anyways. Like if you fetch
you're often
an
not
Underground
casting
Sea, you're
Jambalok
probably
either. Yeah.
if you fetch an Underground Sea, you're probably not like casting Notion Thief with only like you somehow found like 3
you
lands
play like
that only
turn
make
2
green or
Notion
white.
Thief with a crypt or whatever. Then it's just like
okay. I mean, sure, that's a possibility.
Yeah, but it's
then
like it's fairly narrow compared to
Yeah. But, to Reed's point about Timna, I think that's like a really big, like in Thrasios Timna specifically, the Trop Scrubland split is like is honestly probably the worst because it doesn't let you cast, like, yes, you can cast Thrasios if you're playing a Dork turn 1, but it doesn't let you cast Timna on turn 2, which is like it's obviously just the more mana efficient play generally, but it's also like it's very meaningful on turn 3 being able to like cast Thrasios, attack with Timna, and hold up 2 mana.
And also
or
on the Trop Scrub split, if you're casting Thrasios on turn, so in any other split where like theoretically you can cast a Timna on turn 3, Thrasios turn 2 is actually still a fine play if you're being defensive and want to hold up mana for interaction. The issue is that on a Trop Scrub split, you're holding up Scrub for interaction.
You're holding up Scrub.
Which is representing like basically nothing. You're representing like a silence, which is just like the worst thing to be representing.
So yeah, that's a really good point. Just about like which, again, that comes back to like which mana do you want to be tapping, which mana do you want to be holding up. And then yeah, so like if you fetch, for example, like if you do a Bayou Tundra split, yes, that has the potential to make casting like Decay and Trophy a little bit awkward, but it also, like, if you're casting a green Dork, then that already makes it less awkward.
Yeah.
Tundra, I mean, there's Dovin's Veto, but apart from that, not really a lot of.
Let's be honest, who plays
spells.
Dovin's Veto anymore? Just deflecting swats
I mean,
killed all hope of that card being good.
Yeah, so like that's potentially not a bad split. Underground Sea, yes, there's Limbo's Vault and Notion Thief, but like Savannah's also not like it's not a huge issue fetching Savannah, although often in the later stages of the game, Savannah
it becomes very awkward, but
be a little bit of a colorless land, which is when you're like trying to cast your sort of bigger, more impactful spells, your tutors, your consults, and your interaction. Having a land that taps for like neither of the more useful colors, is not the best.
Savannah definitely doesn't tap for Oracle Consult.
And like, yeah, these are again not hard and fast rules, and because if they were, then these would be cards you would be taking out of your deck, and obviously they're not. But just like things to consider rather than sort of, I think people have a tendency to consider, as I said, like they're like, I want to be able to access all of my colors, and then they just kind of autopilot from there.
Yeah.
Or
not even that. Like I feel like a lot of people, even before getting to the first heuristic of wanting to have all the colors, will just autopilot and fetch. Like I've seen a lot of people just go like, fetch UC, fetch Volk. Oh, I can't cast any of these white spells. Oops. So just like have like the understanding that like I want to have as much blue mana as possible, and also I want to cast a green spell here, so like I'm just fetching Trop. Yeah.
And obviously another part of this is considering what your fetch lands find, especially when you have an off-color fetch land. Then it's like important to use that to find, you're playing Thrasios Timna, you have your Wooded Foothills. You're like, okay, if I fetch Trop with my Polluted Delta, then like I'm locked into fetching myself double green, and I won't have one of white or black. So So definitely like make sure that you're taking advantage of the restrictions on your fetches, and also like trying to keep yourself as flexible as possible. Should your like plans or what you need change.
Yeah. Actually,
so that means like not burning something like a polluted delta as your first fetch if you have say even like windswept heath.
Sort of on the topic of fetches as well, though, there's actually been a fair amount of depth added to the terminal and turn 2 decisions of playing. Say you have an opening hand with like a command tower and a fetch land in your opener. There's actually a fair amount of depth now. Basically because opposition agent exists, of whether or not you play the fetch land first or the 5-color or like non-fetch land first. And there's actually a fair amount of decision making to be done on like that exact decision. Like even on your first and second turn, where if you're expecting an op agent earlier rather than later, or anything of that sort, you like sort of want to get your fetches out of the way first. Especially say if you have like 2 fetches in a 5-color land, you probably want to get one of them out of the way first. But it might also be if you use all of your fetches up, you might not have a shuffle for a potential brainstorm draw. And then there's also the potential for if you don't start with the 5-color land and then you draw another 5-color land and like suddenly like a couple draws down the line, your hand's full of like really color intensive things that you can no longer cast because one of your lands isn't a 5-color land when it could have been. That's sort of a reason why you would want to play your rainbow lands first. So it's like sort of just like considering like not just which fetch is going to get what, but like which fetch you're going to play first, and then also like if you're going to play a fetch first, and just like trying to make those decisions. Yeah.
I think one thing that used to be the case is that play your 5-color lands first, and or at least this used to be the trend that I saw a lot. Play your 5-color lands first, save the fetches, for the ponders, brainstorms, and also it kind of allowed you to defer your decision on what to get until time being, and it ended up being that it didn't. You end up usually be pretty fine with this mana. Because you're making the decision later and you're getting exactly what you needed. And I think, as you pointed out, with opposition agent being a huge consideration, the trend to use your fetches early, I think, is important, which lends to kind of Morgan's point about really considering what you're getting and the importance of this kind of planning ahead idea. Something that wasn't necessarily important before because you didn't have the opposition agents running around, but now is more important than ever. Another thing as well, you pointed out whatever Savannah doesn't cast Oracle Consult. Looking at planning ahead, making sure that you're accounting for how much mana and interaction you're going to be able to hold up based off your lands. Like if you get Underground Sea and then Watery Grave, and then you've got like you're getting Savannah or something, like your mana is kind of, your blue mana is tied to your black mana. So if you had split up the one of your let's say you get a UC, but if you split up your Watery Grave between a Bayou and a Tundra, right? You're still helping fix your colors, but this way you're actually spreading out your blue and black mana so that you're not simultaneously tapping out of a blue and black source when trying to cast Oracle Consult. You can still ideally use your blue mana to protect your combo.
Yeah, I think that like, bringing up op agent is also, another thing you should be considering is like what happens, not so much if this one gets op agented, but if the next one gets op agented. If you fetch a Savannah turn 1 and then play your Dork, and then turn 2 your land gets op agented, you're probably going to be having a bad time.
Assuming you're not playing a Selesnya deck. I guess in which case you're already having a bad time, so whatever.
Yeah, there is no situation in which you're not having a bad time. Either you're not in 4 colors and 2 of your colors are green and white, so you're having a bad time, or you're locked out of 2 of your colors, in which case you're also having a bad time.
Cool. I think that about wraps it up for this mini topic, and then we can move on to mine.
Yeah, so we can spend more time on your topic.
Morgan, and before we jump into my topic, Matt had to depart for personal reasons, so we will be carrying on the rest of the show without him. and we will be hearing back from him next time.
Yes.
Anyway, without further ado,
it may not seem particularly different because he's normally so quiet, but this time he's actually not here.
Yep, you're not just missing something.
So my mini topic is pseudo stacks, and this is a term that I use. It's not really I mean, maybe other people use it, but this is kind of the terminology I've been using. And I got into a discussion about it recently on the GitRog server, and I thought it'd be an interesting topic to discuss with you guys. And I guess to kind of give some framing for it, stacks. We've done an episode on stacks. Rule of law, it's like a static effect. Affects everyone. Stacks doesn't have to be completely symmetrical. It can be asymmetrical. Like opposition agent, opponents can't search. But it's generally a static effect that prevents something from happening, generally, okay? Pseudo stacks falls on more of a spectrum. And the analogy, or the way I kind of define pseudo stacks, it's a card that does not fit the mold or of a traditional stacks piece. Either like it's not static text on a permanent that prevents something from happening, but the result and impact it has on the game is very similar, if not identical, to a hard stacks piece. Hence the name pseudo stacks.
It's a card that doesn't have an effect that says stacks, but its effect on the game is stacks.
Yeah. So actually, I think the first card that we should discuss.
It's really more. It's rather than your opponents can't, it's your opponents won't.
Yeah.
There you go.
And,
great one.
Yeah. So I gave perhaps a grim analogy or whatever previously, where in our pre-show I was talking with the guys. I said, imagine there's like some gold bar and people are in line waiting to get it, and there's a guard who has a gun with a single bullet in it, and if you go up to take the gold bar, he's going to shoot you, and then you don't get it, but the next person in line does. And this is supposed to kind of represent a person trying to go for the win in a game, right? If you have something, and it's maybe my favorite card to champion right now, which is Ranger Captain of Eos. It's a one shot, you sacrifice it, it's a silence effect, right? In my analogy with the gold bar, if each individual in this line is acting in complete self-interest, no one wants to get shot by the guard, so no one's going to take the gold bar. And it's as if the guard has, a gun full of bullets, so no one's going to do it, right? It's the same. This one-shot effect is enough of a deterrent to stop more than a single person. So that's the kind of Ranger Captain of Eos silence effect. No one is going to try and use their resources to go all in and try and combo into the Ranger Captain. So then the Ranger Captain persists, and then it's on to the next person's turn. They do the same argument. They make the same argument to themselves. Don't combo. Boom, boom, boom. Next thing you know, it's your turn, and you have a silence effect that you can crack, and it's basically like a grand abolisher, right? So that's the ideal case for a Ranger Captain. And that's kind of the idea between a pseudo stacks. Like on your opponent's turns, it's acting like a rule of law or a silence or something like that. But even though it's only a one shot. So we'll get into discussing other cards that are like Ranger Captain in a bit, but I think maybe the most iconic pseudo stacks piece, as kind of in a category of its own that we've kind of set up, is a Rhystic Study. And Morgan, I know you've talked a fair bit about Rhystic Study as a stacks piece, so why don't you, or a pseudo stacks piece?
That's because it sort of is a stacks piece for a deck that Morgan has historically played.
Yeah. Which is like it's in my view, it's an actual stacks piece against Food Chain, albeit one that has like a couple, ways you could theoretically.
It has some
play
asterisks,
through it.
yeah.
Yeah, like if you find a silence, or like even if the person's limited on mana, sometimes just uncounterability for your spells is good enough. But like as a general rule, Food Chain just can't go off into this. But I think it's more of a pseudo stacks piece for like things like Ad Nauseam and like Breach combos.
Yeah. Where
if you have a few mana and someone's like, okay, I'm gonna try and win, but they're gonna draw at least 10 cards. It's definitely pretty scary because some of those 10 cards are probably interaction. And then if they are, and you don't win, they have the other 8 cards they drew from
to try to
Mystic
do
Study
their own win.
to try and win the game, or
you give it to the
interact
next
more,
person in turn order.
or you give it to the So certainly, storm combos or like combos that involve casting a lot of spells into Rhystic Studies are something that should be approached with caution.
Yeah, and so we put it into the pseudo stacks category, or mainly because it's optional, right? And this is an argument that people have made against Rhystic Study for a long time. It's like, well, it's either a one-sided sphere resistance or they draw a card, but it's always the one that's worse for you. And I think, Morgan, you made a great point about this the other day. I don't know if it was like on Discord or something about that kind of evaluation or argument doesn't necessarily hold water in 4-player free-for-all.
Yeah, like in a 1v1 format, just like one-sided sphere of resistance would be better than Rhystic Study, assuming your opponents are like competent, right? Because Rhystic Study is essentially a one-sided sphere of resistance unless your opponent is confident that, like, by not paying for it, they can make the fact that you draw cards not matter. But that's not, like, in a 4-player free-for-all environment, an interaction between 2 players doesn't have, like, comparing only 2 players, that comparison doesn't have to be favorable for it to be a good play. So, if I cast spells and I don't pay for Rhystic Study, obviously the Rhystic Study player gets an advantage from them drawing cards, but I also get an advantage because I've, developed faster or done whatever. So it's not inherently wrong to, like, not pay for Rhystic Study in the same way that it is in like 1v1, because you can, you give one person, there's 4 of you, and you give one person $5, but you get $2. Like, seems like a pretty good deal considering the other 2 people actually get nothing, right?
Welcome to why Trade Secrets is banned in Commander.
Welcome to why Trade Secrets is banned. Yeah, exactly. Obviously, if you take this to, like, a sufficient extreme, then that's basically just a Tuesday
2DH.
on whatever online gameplay platform you're on. But
or at least that's what Reddit would have you believe.
No. That's if you play games online. Oh boy, do Rhystic Studies get fed. But like it's not inherently wrong to let them draw, or it can be an advantageous play to let them draw the cards in a way that it's, like, much less likely to be in 1v1.
Yeah. So it is a permanent, continuous effect, static ability, but because of the choice aspect, I guess it sort of falls into pseudo stacks. In the same vein, Mystic Remora, like, I feel like that's almost more of a hard stacks.
Yeah, well, you're not paying for
tough,
Mystic Remora, like, ever.
Yeah.
I will
no one
say,
could
though,
paying for Remora is absurd unless it's like
that has
some
never
ISO Rev
happened.
combo with
It has
absolutely
never
absurd amount of
happened
mana.
in the history of CDH. Nobody has ever paid for a fist trigger.
No,
You're
I did that
lying
in
if you say that you have.
while playing Shimmerzer. You would draw enough cards that you could develop enough rocks to pay for a Remora with your ISO Rev.
But I did actually want to say that, like, that sort of, like, the difference between like how Rhystic Study functions in 1v1 and in free-for-all, it's actually sort of like a theme among pseudo stacks, because, like, pseudo stacks doesn't really exist in 1v1 because it's really just, can you play through this effect?
Yeah.
And, like, you're gonna eventually you're gonna have to force your way through it, or you just don't care about it. Like with the Ranger Captain example that you had, there's no hope that it just goes away. Like, if your opponent has a Ranger Captain in 1v1, you just have to
force
play.
them to crack it.
You have to play through the Ranger Captain. There's no going around it. It's like they
Yeah.
either crack it and you have to deal with that fact, or you're playing it a way that it doesn't matter. In free-for-all, for a lot of these effects, there's sort of a hope there that you don't have to deal with it. Somebody else has to deal with it. For, like, almost any of these, which is, like, really where, like, sort of part of the pseudo stacks comes from.
I think let's actually talk about the Ranger Captain kind of category of cards we have here, because the one thing I really like about this category, and I think they're a category of cards that are perhaps undervalued in CDH because people aren't necessarily, I don't want to say properly evaluating, but like they're not considering the full amount that you can just squeeze out of these cards by virtue of just the like, game theory between, a 4-player free-for-all and everyone acting in like, complete self-interest. Like the fact that a Ranger Captain can go a full turn cycle because no one wants to play into it makes it so much better of a card when you're doing the evaluation, right? Like, I mean, comparing Ranger Captain, I think a very comparable card to Ranger Captain is Grand Abolisher, where, and obviously they're not comparable for different reasons depending on the deck, but Grand Abolisher, basically a 2 CMC silence on a stick. Ranger Captain, it's a 3 CMC silence on a stick. So much worse. Except, obviously Grand Abolisher is silence that is only for your turn when you're trying to combo. Ranger Captain can be used to silence your opponents, but there's the 1-man differential. The fact that Ranger Captain isn't just, like, the difference between silence and abeyance, for instance. Abeyance, for those who might not know, is a 2 CMC. For 1 and a white, it's an instant. Target opponent can't cast instants, sorceries. Like, it just can't cast spells this turn or activate abilities, I believe. And it cantrips. So in 1v1, it's kind of just better silence, depending on the deck, because you can basically time walk your opponent and draw a card. In CDH, silence is obviously the much superior card, because you're not just focusing down one opponent and you're not leaving your other 2 opponents free to interact with you. But Ranger Captain, the fact that you can leverage it to basically silence each one of your opponents or prevent them from going off and then still have it on your turn is what gives it a significant advantage. And we have a couple other cards here that can provide a similar effect. So there's this category of cards, and there's kind of a theme. A lot of these are basically all onboard tricks, because there is. You could point out that if you just reveal the silence, from your hand, you're like, well, don't go off because I'm just going to cast this silence.
It operates very similarly to how a Ranger Captain operates.
It operates very similarly, with the one exception that once a Ranger Captain has resolved...
It's really hard to counter, yes.
Yeah, you're not countering this ability. So an in-play Ranger Captain is a lot better than a revealed silence, because often people can counter their way through it. But that aside, yeah, a revealed silence and a revealed onboard trick function very similarly. So this next category of cards in this onboard revealed tricks disruption is the kind of, I guess I'd call them like the force spike creatures.
Yeah, there's
any Curse Catcher,
kind of thing.
Mausoleum Wanderer, Judge's Familiar,
Yeah.
And Patron Wizard.
And then you also have Void Mage Prodigy.
Also Void Mage Prodigy. So Curse Catcher, Patron Wizard, Void Mage Prodigy, these are cards I'd basically... Like, they're very, very niche, probably only for, like, Azami or something.
People have put them in, sort of more, Staxy, things like double Timna, like either Timna Malcolm or, Timna Sakashima type.
No, I like Judge's Familiar and Mausoleum Wanderer in those decks, but the Curse Catcher, Patron Wizard, Void Mage, those are probably...
Yeah, the ones with flying...
Yeah, those with flying have Timna utility.
And if you're playing Timna and Rule of Laws and Blue, the ones with flying are definitely a consideration.
I've been championing the 1 CMC flying ones because of the Timna utility, but the effect that they have, and it's because of the effect they have, which is you will consistently tax all of your opponent's mana by 1, just by having it in play, because no one is going to tap out for an ad nauseum with an in-play Curse Catcher or Judge's Familiar or whatever. No one is going to do it because it's just a free, easy counter, right? So you will be consistently tapping, or you'll be consistently putting your opponents at a mana disadvantage doing that. And Patron Wizard obviously needs a lot of wizards to kind of take advantage of that. At triple blue, it's 4 spikes. You tap an untapped wizard, counter target spell unless its controller pays 1 generic mana. But if you have enough wizards, it kind of cascades, where the more wizards you have, the more mana that your opponents are forced to keep up in order to resolve their spells or even attempt to go for things. So you end up creating a significant mana advantage for yourself compared to your opponents when you have these kinds of cards in play.
Honestly, it's a little insulting that you left Urtai off this list.
True. Yeah, and Void Mage Prodigy, not a Force Spike, but an in-play counter spell, just makes people second guess. I think Void Mage Prodigy is more similar to Ranger Captain.
It has sort of a different. Well, it has a different sort of texture.
I guess Void Mage Prodigy and Glenalendra
how it plays out. Yeah, it's more of like a and that with hard counters, and this is sort of interesting because it's like with the ones that there's a way out of the counter with like the force spikes, or you can pay some amount of mana to not have your stuff countered. You'll be willing to cast like whatever you want to do it as long as you have that mana up. With stuff like Void Mage Prodigy and Glenalendra, it's a lot more of a game of chicken. Of all right, well I'm just gonna cast my spells, and if they feel like it's a good enough one to counter, then like they're gonna do that, but I'm gonna try to play like just under that line and resolve like enough good stuff that I'm still winning without like them countering any of it, which is like that's a very different play pattern to have Curse Catcher and like Patron Wizard and stuff play out.
Will you counter this Rhystic Study?
Will you counter this Smothering Tithe? Can I have this Necropotence? No? All right, well we know where the line is now.
Yeah, there's a lot of bullying that can be done when you have a resolved, basically uncounterable counterspell in play. Yeah. Also, one thing before, because we've got a couple more cards we're going to discuss here, and I kind of want to say the last piece about Ranger Captain. One thing I like to, so I play Ranger Captain. You typically play it in decks without access to blue, although I still think it's reasonable in something like a Razakat's kind of deck. The one thing I really like to do with Ranger Captain, if you're playing like lots of stacks pieces or hate bears, is go find a Sylvan Safekeeper. Because one thing people will try and do in order to force the Ranger Captain is throw a removal spell at it or a bounce spell or something in someone's end step and then force you to crack it. But if you have a Sylvan Safekeeper, that thing is only getting cracked on your own terms. And it makes it much more likely to still have it in play come your next untap step. We've got three more cards in this category.
So we already sort of talked about one of them, which is the exact words that we have on these show notes are revealed force of will, but it's basically equivalent to the revealed silence that we were talking about, where like any known interaction sort of has a similar impact on the game that like Ranger Captain or like specifically like Void Mage Prodigy do, because even though they're more counterable than like an activated ability, you still end up with, again, these pseudo stack sort of games of chicken where it's sort of funny because if they were a stacks, if you were to transfer it over to a stacks effect, it would almost read like your opponents can't cast spells that are too good. Like they're allowed to cast any mediocre spell in their deck, but the first good spell that an opponent casts is countered.
Yeah. The one thing with the revealed counterspells and silence is it is kind of the standard CDH math of the person who's thinking about whether or not they want a combo is counting up the amount of counterspells and interaction protection they have in their hand, and then trying to guess how much their opponents have. And the force of will is kind of just a known quantity. Then it's like, well, I know there's this force of will, and he's holding up how much mana, and maybe he's got a deflecting swat or something. So it's really just throwing a piece of known information out there to hopefully represent something to dissuade them from going off. Whereas once you've resolved these other things, the amount of counterspells they have in their hand is meaningless. We've got Deathrite Shaman as a kind of single shot use Grave Hate, but this is often enough to act as a deterrent to stop people from going for like Razakath or certain breach lines or
stuff, or a bunch of that kind of thing.
Yeah, and on that note, stop tapping your goddamn Deathrite Shaman.
I love when people do it, but I hate when it's the other grave deck at the table that profits from it. And things like Deathrite Shaman, unlike what might differentiate this from something like a Graph Digger's Cage. We were discussing a bit pre-show. I think
is Morgan, you were saying like this is, you basically count Deathrite Shaman as a stacks effect.
But like, the difference
yeah,
is
like against certain combos.
Yeah.
It, like the fact that it untaps on your turn and you can use it every turn, means that like it's extremely, in most cases I find it's practically a hard stacks effect. So obviously like if you have an instant speed interaction, you can sometimes like get around it.
Yeah,
and there's also like it's a softer stacks effect for like breach combos than it is for something like a reanimation effect. But I guess I was specifically thinking in the context of Reanimator that Deathrite Shaman is practically a hard stacks piece.
Yeah, the difference
outside
would
of
be...
I think the reason why it acts as a pseudo stacks piece is because it is only a single shot. It has the same kind of effect with Ranger Captain, where if you're against 3 Reanimator opponents, no one's going to bin their Razakath and expose it to Deathrite Shaman and try and reanimate, so then you can often make it around a turn cycle without having to activate or without being forced to activate the Deathrite Shaman.
I guess
you
it's
can
also
overload
a pseudo-stacks piece because people tap it to do like unimportant stuff a lot.
you can overload a Deathrite Shaman. You can't overload a Grafdigger's Cage. You can cast as many reanimation spells as you want into a Grafdigger's Cage, and it's not going anywhere.
Yeah, and then I was saying Grafdigger's Cage versus Deathrite Shaman is people will not launch an Entomb into a Deathrite Shaman, whereas people will launch an Entomb into a Grafdigger's Cage. With the kind of, let me be mana efficient now, and then I can remove it and reanimate it later with some counter backup, whereas Deathrite Shaman is like, nope.
Yeah, I guess like kind of the reason I think that it's a hard stacks piece in that context is also like if you compare it, if you say you cast Entomb and then you cast Reanimate, if you do that into a Deathrite Shaman, it's not just that you're out like the Reanimate, you're also out the Entomb or like whatever the Entomb found, right? As opposed to like something like Ranger Captain, where essentially you can try and commit one card to deal with it. Like you commit one card to force them to crack it, and then you still have like the other important card that you are trying to like have work properly. Whereas with Deathrite Shaman, like not only does it not work and then you can just try again later, like, my reanimate didn't work, but it's fine, I can animate dead the Razakath next turn. It's like, no, the Razakath is gone. Yeah. So now you have to find something else and another way to reanimate it.
And then the last card we have in this category is a funny one.
Hey, man.
Aetherflux Reservoir. Reed, you wanna...
Well, no. Specifically Aetherflux Reservoir with more than 50 life, but less than 150 life.
Yeah, all you need is like a 6 sitting at 60 life with Reservoir, and no one can go for a win.
Theoretically, yes.
Okay.
There is a problem with that, which is a deflecting swat.
True.
Yeah.
Or if people are able to go off on top of that activation.
I've definitely also won through somebody having an Aetherflux Reservoir with more than 50 life with Flash Era, when it's just like, I'm going to present this. I'm going to cast this, I think it was like cast a Grand Abolisher, in response shoot me, in response flash. So definitely not a completely hard stacks piece, but it's definitely up there.
Aetherflux Reservoir really is the best counterspell.
Like pseudo stacks piece, yeah.
And on episode 52 of Flash was a dumb card.
Okay, moving on. We've got this, I guess this next category. We've got the cards Survival of the Fittest and Yisan here. And I guess Ranger Captain could reasonably fit into this category as well. Where I would say that the theme that ties these cards together is that they threaten interaction, which then you're not really forced to use, and then you can come around to your turn, and then you can use it for whatever advantage you want, right? So with Yisan, a big thing that's what makes Yisan, I think, even kind of playable is that you can threaten on each open verse, the idea that you can threaten a piece of interaction that would stop your opponents from winning, which would then, if they're aware of what's in Yisan, and usually as a Yisan pilot, I would like to remind my opponents and be like, "Hey man, listen, don't go off, otherwise I'm going to be forced to verse now and like stop you in your tracks."
Trying to intimidate them into
Basically, because otherwise, if you are forced to use your Yasan to go find your interactive piece, you're not actively progressing your own game plan. But the fact that you can get an interactive piece at instant speed, stacks or interaction like Rex Sage or something, what have you, the fact that you can get that at instant speed dissuades your opponents from comboing into it, which then means come the end step, before your turn you're going to untap, you can Yasan for some proactive piece that furthers your own game plan. And that's the strength of something like Yasan. We talked about Ranger Captain going around untapping with a silence. Survival of the Fittest, similarly, you're not being forced to pitch your whole hand to just find reactive stacks pieces.
Hull Breacher or Op Agent or whatever.
I mean, the thing with saying that with survival is that, if you're getting a Hull Breacher or Opposition Agent, you can't really complain all that much.
No, but it's like there are
if you only have a single creature and you're trying to do like a Razaketh, go find Razaketh, find Loyal Retainers or Spellseeker or something, you'd rather not have to pitch that creature. So that's the advantage of those.
Said, the advantage of survival in that situation is with an extra green, you can just like cycle through the Razaketh on the way to the stacks piece, and then on your turn, like if you hit any creature, just find the reanimate, which is sort of disgusting.
That's true. And the one thing I'd give advice to people, like I just said, is if you're really trying to leverage these some of these stacks pieces and make the most of them, you really want to use politics to really reinforce and try and dissuade people from comboing into them. The ultimate way to play around a Ranger Captain, because when you untap with the Ranger, when an opponent untaps with the Ranger Captain of Eos, it's like having a Grand Abolisher in play. I mean, not quite the same, but functionally very similar. You don't want that. Ranger Grand Abolisher is like a like very much counter on site or remove threat, or like it's a red alert. Everyone, do not let him untap with this card in play. Ranger Captain should be very similar, and so you definitely want this thing to be gone by the time your opponent is untapping. So sometimes you will be forced to play into it, and that's kind of how you have to do it, how you have to approach it. But if you're on the side of the player playing the Yasan, Ranger Captain, whatever, try and dissuade your opponents from doing that. Cool. You guys have anything to say on these?
No, I mean, I feel like they're pretty self-explanatory. It's just like holding up potential interaction.
And with lesser known decks, Ranger Captain's obviously in play, but Survival, Yasan, you have to let people know what you could find to stop them potentially. Next up, we've got Urza plus Trinisphere, and this was Reed's, I believe, right?
Yes, this is a fun one because it's like the funny thing about this is that Trinisphere on its own is just a stacks piece. Like it's just everything costs 3. Great, this is like the definition of a stacks piece. But with an Urza in play on the side of the Trinisphere player, it sort of becomes this pseudo stacks piece where with a Trinisphere in play, you might just be able to win through Trinisphere and just be like, all right, well, I just like have 6 mana. I'm gonna do my Oracle Consult thing through this Trinisphere and just win the game. And like it also makes other people it makes it difficult to interact with me and makes it hard for other people to hold on mana and all this stuff. But with an Urza in play, you can be like, yeah, I'm just gonna like spend this 6 mana to go for my Oracle plus Consult, and then Urza turns off the Trinisphere, and suddenly nobody else has restrictions on their interaction, and you're just like out 6 mana for a 3 mana combo. So it just stops you from like it makes it a lot harder for you to attempt wins than if there was just a Trinisphere in play.
It adds more to the it's I guess
Trinisphere is stacks, but they're not being a Trinisphere is
yes.
stacks.
The fact I guess the thing is the disruptive elements of Trinisphere are greater than just this Trinisphere itself when combined with Urza, which might seem counterintuitive because Urza players kind of just doing him.
How does
turning off for himself? Yeah, exactly. Kind of strange, but that makes sense. Like we were saying, these are all kind of like on a spectrum. I'd say the Trinisphere plus Urza's closer to just hard stacks, whereas something like
no,
Revealed
100%.
Force of Will is at the end, the bottom end of pseudo stacks, and lots of the stuff's in the middle. Next up, we have a card that I've been playing with a lot recently, which is Sigil Tracer. We kind of weren't sure which category to put this in. It was kind of in its own category. Morgan, do you want to talk a bit about Sigil Tracer? Or
yeah, so I mean, I think the reason that like it sort of fits into two different categories is because there's two different things that Sigil Tracer can do. One of the things we were talking about was like when deciding sort of how to classify these was uncertainty, right? And so in one way, Sigil Tracer can have a lot of uncertainty, and that's when you use it to double up on interaction, right? Like you go for your combo, someone casts a counter spell, and then the Sigil Tracer player, you try and counter it, and then the Sigil Tracer player just copies it over top, and then like now you have to counter that copy too. So that's like obviously uncertain because you don't know what interaction is or isn't forthcoming from your opponents. But the other effect that Sigil Tracer has is that it just makes it like really hard to cast good instants or sorceries.
Yeah.
Like you cast a Demonic Tutor and the Sigil Tracer player goes, "Yes, please." Like, or even more sort of like extreme, you want to cast like Ad Nauseam or like Peer into the Abyss. Like you just can't into an open Sigil Tracer, right? Like, because there's not only are they going to get a copy, theirs is going to resolve first. It can definitely go very, very badly for you. And so in some ways it's more like it's like a Ranger Captain, but only for like a specific set of spells.
and then also kind of like a
also,
Void Mage Prodigy, yeah.
or like one that's in the next category, but I think also like fits with this. It's also sometimes like a Vexing Shusher, where like someone tries to counter your thing, you counter back, and then someone with a Vexing Shusher is like, I'll just make the counter spell uncounterable. And Sigil Tracer can have sort of a similar effect.
Okay, speaking of Vexing Shusher, this is our... Oh yeah, and then last thing is, Sigil Tracer also has the benefit of being a combo.
Yeah, a nice concept around
things
legs.
that untap and mana. Or also just like, you can use it on your own Demonic Tutor as well. Like,
yeah, I had a...
Or use it
cast
on
Demonic
your
Tutor,
own
Sigil
console
Tracer,
for Tainted Pact.
Oracle console. Cool.
So our next category of cards really focuses on the unknown, which is something Morgan talked about with Sigil Tracer, kind of dipping into this category as well. So here we have Vexing Shusher, Counterbalance, just having open mana.
I feel like it's open mana and cards in hand.
Cards in hand, and not specifically
open mana
blue
plus
mana,
Thrasios?
usually. Yeah.
Spoopy.
And then we'll cover these last two sections. We've got one U open in Flash meta, which thank God we don't have to consider anymore. And then we've got scrying, discarding, passing on really strong cards, which we'll probably save for last. But yeah, so Vexing Shusher, Counterbalance, open mana. Morgan talked about Vexing Shusher already. The idea being, people are less likely to go into or combo into a Vexing Shusher on the assumption that whatever they're trying to do is going to be stopped with an uncounterable counterspell. So kind of like an in-play Void Mage Prodigy, not likely to combo into that, except that the player with the Vexing Shusher does not need to be the person who's interacting, which adds just so much to the consideration.
I mean, it's like sort of in a way this sort of like parallels Urza plus Trinisphere too, where it's like it just makes it easier for interaction to happen with any given win attempt, basically.
Yeah, Vexing Shusher really shifts the game into your control, where you're the person who gets to decide what is resolving and what's not a lot of the time. Very, very strong card. We were talking about Sigil Tracer. I had a game. Matt and I were playing with a friend of the show, Keegan, in like this. We're doing some testing with like ultra grindy Thrasios Tymna kind of mirrors. And we were playing with a fourth who happened to be on Vexing Shusher in like a Thrasios Bruce deck that I helped him make. And I had Sigil Tracer. I ended up trying to go for like an overloaded Cyclonic Rift. My board was pretty insane. I think Matt tries to overload a Cyclonic Rift back, and there's a Vexing Shusher in play with 2 untapped mana. And the fight between the Sigil Tracer, like copying my Cyclonic Rift on top of, because the whole point of I was trying to counter Matt's Cyclonic Rift, but you have to like get through the Vexing Shusher activations. So when he goes to activate to make the Cyclonic Rift uncounterable, then I have to produce interaction on top of that. So Sigil Tracer helping to get additional cards or things to help remove the Shusher on top of that, and lots of interesting counterplay between these 2 cards, and they're very they tend, those were the 2 cards that were kind of dominating the game once they came into play, and it was sufficiently late enough. Next up we have Counterbalance and Open Mana. So Counterbalance is one that I've been I've been putting in a lot of my decks since back when I was playing, testing with it first in like a Shimmerzer. Usually I'd only put it into a deck when you have like a combined split, a combined total between the number of 1-drops and 2-drops in your deck, above 45, ideally above 50, where the idea being half the time you are shutting off one of the 2 most important CMCs in CDH and asymmetrically. But one thing that I think is crucial when playing Counterbalance, unless you have some kind of repeatable way to refresh the top card of your library, is maximizing the uncertainty factor.
Oh yeah, 100%.
Where your opponents are not, no one, if you, let's say you're player A and player B, you've got a Counterbalance and player B's turn untaps, you have not revealed the top card of your library, it's not likely your opponent is just going to go, okay, I'm going to cast Thassa's Oracle into this Counterbalance.
I mean, some people might, but
Oracle Consult's an especially rough one because like 1 and 2. And yeah, like I people often they like check with Counterbalance. It's always interesting to see like you go like, all right, I'll cast like Birds of Paradise, and like some people are just like, all right, flip the top, and some people will be like, I'm not flipping the top. Like I value you guys not knowing what's on top of my library more than I value like you not having a Birds of Paradise.
Yeah, I think that's for me that's the key aspect of Counterbalance, and something that really takes it from what I would say is basically, I wouldn't say unplayable, but like not very good to being playable, which is maximizing that uncertainty. Do not flip for your opponents are going to try and test your Counterbalance to see what the CMC is at. Be very reluctant on flipping it. Counterbalance is also gets a lot better when you can reset the top of your library. So I was testing it in the kind of Thrasios Timna Grindfest, where Thrasios can't actually set up the top of your library with his scry and draw, but you can use it to clear the top of your library and get a fresh Counterbalance, which can be useful sometimes.
And I mean, I think the poster child for that is obviously Elsha, right? Where you can, like most of your deck you can cast off your library, off the top of your library at instant speed.
Yeah, I liked it a lot in Zur if my life total got too low to win with Necropotence. Just having Necro in play with a Counterbalance, just free resets all the time. Pretty great. Top, obviously, great with Counterbalance. Also, it turns your top deck tutors and Brainstorm into counterspells, which is pretty dope. One thing you need to consider with Counterbalance is while it's basically an uncounterable counterspell when you do get to flip it, and unlike something like a Chalice of the Void, which if you can play Chalice of the Void, if you can support it, which very few decks can, but the decks that can, that card is amazing. That doesn't actually eat any of the resources from your opponents. It just stops them from being able to do things. Counterbalance, when they eventually have to test into it, you do get to deny them some cards, which is nice. But yeah, one thing you need to be cautious about with Counterbalance is counterspells don't stop it. Deflecting SWAT, that kind of thing doesn't stop it. What will stop it is Veil of Summer. Not Autumn's Veil, notably, but Veil of Summer, because Autumn's Veil says your spells can't be countered by blue or black spells.
Doesn't it say it can't be targeted?
No, your spells can't be countered by blue or black spells, and your permanents can't be the target of blue or black spells. Well, I'm pretty sure.
Oh yeah,
we can look. It does.
Creatures you control.
Creatures you control. Yeah. Okay. Well, Autumn's Veil, Veil of Summer just says your spells can't be countered.
Yeah.
Then has the blue. You and permanents you control have, or creatures you control have hexproof from blue or black until end of turn. But yeah, so Veil of Summer, the main out to counterbalance, or Shusher, or whatever other granting and counterability. Yep. Then next we have Open Mana. Reed, who is it between Reed and Morgan? Which one of you is the bigger sandbag?
Oh, 100% me.
Reed. What?
So then, Reed, why don't you talk about the value of Open Mana and using politics to kind of make the most of your counter spells without having to use them?
Sure. I mean, so realistically, Open Mana really matters. So the name of the game with making Open Mana a threat is plausible deniability. Which is the concept that you're holding open mana for some other reason than you having interaction. I.e., you have a Thrasios that you need to activate and you're holding up exactly 4 mana. Or, you're activating some other thing. Or you, are going to cast Eladamri's Call for 2 mana. Or something like that. Something that makes sense with the mana that you have. And then using that and leveraging that fact to basically threaten to the other people at the table that you don't have interaction sometimes, like when you think other people have interaction, or alternatively threatening that you do have interaction when you don't, and you don't think that other people at the table have interaction, and then using that to exert pressure on people to not cast their game-winning spells, and then be able to use that mana productively and progress in your game plan and other facets.
Or sometimes it can be... one thing I've done when playing Baral recently is basically saying to my opponents, you're not going to win the counter war. I will win the counter war, but we will both expend all of our counter spells stopping, me, and it will end with you getting stopped by me, and then player, B or C or whatever is going to win.
Yeah, so
don't do it.
It's a hard...
and then that result is like, well, great, neither of us have to use our counter spells.
It's a hard line to take at some points. That definitely works, but the issue with taking that hard of a stance that I've found 100% of the time is that a lot of the time people will either check you immediately or say, okay, show me what you got. And prove to me that you can't stop me this turn or else I'm still going for it.
Yeah, it might help the case a bit when you're playing something like Baral.
Oh yeah, no, 100%.
Has a reputation and
it's definitely a harder it's definitely a harder stance to take when you're on something like Thrasios Tymna, and then you do
have... your deck has 7 counter spells total,
or when you do have something to do with your mana, because Brawl usually doesn't have anything to do with its mana except just fuck you for trying to cast a spell.
I want to loot. let me loot.
So it's a lot more threatening when Brawl, which is the deck that has nothing to gain from holding open mana except for countering your stuff, holds up mana, versus the Thrasios player holding up mana, who obviously has a Thrasios activation to gain.
Yeah. Dope. And then we've got our last two, which was one and a U in Flash meta, which I think we've covered to death on the show. But if anyone wants to say some more on that, then go ahead.
Nope. Moving on.
Yep.
Cool. And then this last one, which one of you put this one?
Maybe it was.
I
didn't
Matt.
put it. Maybe it was Matt.
Was it Matt?
Definitely
Okay.
a thing, which is scrying, discarding, or passing on really strong cards. Alternatively tutoring the wrong target, or the quote-unquote wrong card, off of a revealed tutor. It indicating that you already have something else.
Yeah, that's always an interesting meta of revealed information. I mean, I feel like the best analogy of that is in 1v1 formats, when you get Jace Fate sealed. Yeah. And then you draw something really good, and you're they leave it on top. You draw something really good. You're just well, I guess this isn't good enough.
Yeah. Yeah.
Fucking,
And like there's some effects with that.
That
like,
line, sorry,
like someone gets
just that line makes me laugh so much. Which is somebody activates Jace targeting you. They look at your card. They're like, "Yeah, you can have it, sure." And you're just like, "God damn it."
Yeah, like like you cast. I mean, there's not as much of it in EDH, but like you cast like some spell that makes you like loot or discard cards. Like you cast a frantic search, and then you pitch like Time Twister, or like you discard like Time Twister. I mean, I guess discarding Time Twister to hand size like makes a certain amount of sense.
Discard like Hall
But,
Breacher.
Force of Will pitching Time Twister.
Like
Classic.
you discard like some really strong card to hand size, and then your opponents are just like, well, what the fuck's left in their hand?
Yesterday, I think
imprint
the other day, I
something
Force
strong
of
under
Willed
Chromox.
pitching Gilded Drake into a board full of like really strong creatures, and I mean, it pained me to do it, and I wasn't sure if it was the complete right call, but I think I ended up winning that game, and it was like, damn, what the heck else? What other blue cards does he have in his hand?
It also, like Chrome Mox imprinting, discarding to hand size. One of the ones that happened recently to me was playing Cole. I E-tutored for a Mana Crypt, and everybody on the table was immediately on high alert because that deck like only E-tutors for Skull Clamp.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I guess to put a bow on this mini topic, be cautious or be aware on how you're evaluating cards. That if a card could present this sort of pseudo stacks effect, you might want to evaluate it higher. It's not just Patron Wizard isn't just a force spike on a stick. You can get multiple cards or a stronger effect out of it than you might think in the 4-player free-for-all setting. And yeah, maybe if you can leverage more pseudo stacks effects that stop your opponents and then do something really strong for you, maybe do some of that.
And well, it's nice if your opponents can't execute their game plan. It's often good enough if they don't want to.
Yep.
Yeah. By Ranger Captain BS. Okay. On to Gut Check, everyone's favorite segment. Gut Check!
Get check.
Gut check.
I've got I wouldn't say it's a spicy one. It's just a one for us this week.
Of all the gut checks, it's definitely one of them.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So, question is, what card or cards have you always wanted / hold a special place in your heart? So, like, for many players, this might be something like a piece of Power 9, or like, a signed copy of something from a particular artist, or like some really pimped out version of a card. What is that for you? And if you guys want, I can start first. Give you guys some time to think. For me, ever since starting to play Magic and kind of like learning about Legacy and seeing the card Force of Will, I've kind of always just wanted to have a playset of Force of Wills. That's just always been like just so cool to me. I mean, I've got more I've got some cards that are like more expensive than Force of Wills. And it's like, I guess I could sell a card and buy. It's not like there's anything super stopping me from owning a playset. It's just like right now I have like no real reason to own a playset of Force of Wills. But I don't know, man. There's something about playset of Force of Wills in like a Legacy deck or something that's just so cool to me ever since I started playing.
I wouldn't say like always I've wanted this card, but I guess since it was revealed / since it came out, I've really wanted at least one, but like preferably to be able to play a playset, even though they were just Pringle immediately. Playset or a card of Invocation Days. Just because that card, like the art on that card is just fantastic. And I think it's like one of the coolest looking cards out there. I was considering getting a playmat as sort of the very cheap version of owning one of them.
Nice. Morgan?
I, I guess it's Ugin. Like, I don't know, I just... and, like, to a certain extent, also, like, Nicol Bolas Planeswalker. I really like the design of this card actually just costs 1 million mana, but basically ends the game on the spot. And, Ugin was really well done. We'd known he was a part of the story for a really long time. And then the card representation, was a good callback. His plus is Ghostfire. His minus is the opposite of Nicol Bolas's. And it was just like a good balance of being really powerful, capturing the flavor, but also I think being, ultimately balanced. I don't think it really wrecked anything. And I've always wanted to own one, but it's always been, more expensive than I wanted to just pick up without having a specific place to put it, and I just never really had a reason. So I've never gotten around to buying it. But
you don't own a single Ugin?
No.
Oh, I thought
I
he was like, you're like, oh, I want like a place. I was like,
Nope,
dang.
no, I do not. Sorry, like I own an Ugin the Ineffable, but not an Ugin Spirit Dragon.
Dude, now's the time to buy Ugin, right? It just got reprinted. It's the cheapest it's ever been. It's like $20.
Buy it was like a few months ago, unfortunately. But
oh, is it? Is it gone back up
it's
again?
above 30 now.
Damn. I need to pick up another copy, I guess. Okay. Well, that wraps up for Gut Check. And on to listener questions. We have a listener question coming to us from Was Here. Was Here asks, after a tournament, how do you guys evaluate the performance of your deck and your plays? Also, how do you improve off of these?
So the answer from Morgan is he just wins stuff and then just like sort of brings the same list to the next tournament and does it again.
Can you improve perfection?
I bring different lists. It does, when the list doesn't seem to impact my results, it does make it hard to evaluate.
I mean, quite honestly, it's sort of just like, for me, I don't know, it might be different for you guys, but for me, specifically looking at like tournament results, it's just looking at games that I lost and seeing if I could have impacted them in any way, shape, or form. It's just a bit harder to look at one games and see how you could have improved a lot of the time. So I usually don't really bother if there's a sufficient number of like lost games or like games with specific misplays in them, that I can like go back and rectify or make sure that I have in mind for improvements in the future. And then for specific lists, it's really more just about like, quite honestly, I'd like to say that I do a lot of like heavy iteration after tournaments, but typically a lot of the time when I bring a list to a tournament, it's because I'm like super confident in how the list performs and I've already done like 99.9% of the legwork in getting it to where I want it to be. So I'm typically very, very satisfied with how with like a list that I brought to a tournament, just because like I've already put in all the work to make sure it is that way once I bring it.
Yeah, and I think that's like, I think it's important to like emphasize that that's appropriate. Like I think that generally, like obviously, based on your results of the tournament, you can draw some conclusions. My Tazri Zerda meme brew, I didn't put life death in. I have found that card's like pretty unnecessary in like regular Razakats, because usually if I'm doing survival stuff I get Spellseeker, but then this time I was getting Loyal Retainers, so you have one less body. And anyways, just not having life death, like it cost me a game and it like almost cost me another game. And so like that was like sort of an obvious thing, but that was also a list that I'd put together like very shortly before the tournament. I don't think you want to put yourself in a position where you are making substantial changes to your deck after your tournament, unless you made like hard meta calls that were wildly wrong. You like that sort of legwork is stuff you want to be doing before the tournament, and like unless you had like incredibly abnormal results, you generally don't want to make changes based on that, because like there's so much variance that like you can't just I ran into the weird stacks matchup, and like, yeah, it turns out that when they're playing, like I thought my deck was like pretty stacks resilient, but when they're playing Ward of Bones, like I guess I don't have, like I can't do much through
when you're
that,
making
or,
like 3 copies of Archon of Emiria, like sure,
Yeah,
or
like,
Archon of Valor's Reach, like yeah, great. Like I can't.
So like I think really looking after a tournament is definitely a great time to analyze like your play, look for mistakes you made, and you can definitely find those in games that you won. As an example,
Oh yeah, sorry.
In the final,
Me saying I don't do that wasn't wasn't me saying to do that, to follow that. I was just saying for me, I find that it's a lot easier to find misplays in lost games. If you're looking to become a much better player, absolutely analyze every game in a tournament. It's definitely the much more productive thing to
I
do.
mean, I do think it's definitely appropriate to focus on lost games, but like just like take a look at everything. They're in the finals of Marchesa. I was looking for a line I could Gilded Drake at Kodama and then try and win through like a Deafening Silence, and or I could just Gilded Drake a Hull Breacher and go for a Twister, and like I was going like, is there a line here? I'm pretty sure there's a line, and like I played my land, and then immediately went like, that was so stupid. If I'm gonna Gilded Drake a Kodama, I definitely should have saved this land drop, to get an extra trigger to put in like the line I wound up finding. I would have been putting in a Lion's Eye Diamond, which is a pretty good one when you have Razaketh and there's a Deafening Silence out. It's not a bad one to like put in for free, but yeah, focusing on the games you lost because they are the ones where doing things differently or having things differently is like more likely to have changed the outcome. And did you encounter certain things that you felt you didn't have answers for, or that you were particularly soft to? Is a good thing to like at least take a look at, especially if you're going to be playing tournaments in that meta again. But I think for a one-off tournament, you definitely don't want to be making a whole bunch of changes in response to what is ultimately going to be like a biased and small sample of games.
For me, I don't play in, or it's been a while since I played in any like CEDH tournament, but in my experience playing in like Hearthstone tournaments and also recently in like the Mythic Qualifier on Arena, I would say the most important time or the best time to evaluate your plays is immediately after the game. Do just a quick post-mortem on each game, maybe even if you win, on could I have done something better? Did I miss out? Or if there was a play where I was like 50-50 between doing something, was that the right play in retrospect? That's usually pretty good. It helps when it helps for future when you're trying to do plays to, make sure that you're actually able to consider all of the lines and then choose the best one. I guess that's kind of what separates like a good player from a great player is, I guess it's a two-parter. One is the ability to see all the options, and then the ability to make the correct option, right? I mean, if you're, when I'm playing chess, I definitely do not see all the same possible moves that like a higher level player or like a grandmaster does. Even if I'm able to select the best move out of the moves that I am able to see, which I often still am not able to do. But in Magic, maybe I'm a bit better at that. And then the second part would be how do you improve off of these? One thing I know I did in the Mythic Qualifier, I made a play mistake. Basically, I had been setting up something with whatever the freaking Kaldheim Icy Manipulator is, because the format was Kaldheim Sealed, which was brutal. But the Kaldheim Icy Manipulator, I was basically tapping down a lethal attacker every turn, and I was manually setting the stop in pre-combat every time, and I was just about to secure the win and stabilize, and then I basically just okayed through the at the beginning of combat step and did not tap down a lethal attacker, and then I died. And so it's been a long, like it was going to go this just for like this game was going to, he was going to deck out on his next turn. Like it was a long grindy match. So the takeaway for me was, you know, obviously I'd slipped up, but I'd slipped up after a long drawn out game where I thought I had it in the bag. And, you know, the game's not over till it's over. Do not get relaxed, you know, stay on top of your shit until the game is 100% done. And I often in games, if I remember my mistakes, I will try, like in games like after the fact, I will try and consciously think about the action as I'm doing it to kind of reinforce good habits, so that in future these kinds of things are automatic and you know I'm using less brain juice.
Yeah, I think also like one thing, you know, talking about like things that didn't work out, you know, you said like when you had options, analyzing if you made the right play. I do think it's like important not to be entirely outcome focused, because I think people fall into that trap like, oh, I did X instead of Y and it didn't work out. Not even like I lost the game eventually, but just like it didn't work out in that specific instance. That doesn't necessarily mean it was the wrong play, right? Like every action you take is like a probability calculation, and you can make the right probability calculation and just be in the case where you get the unlikely result.
Yeah, like sometimes it's like
at Marchesa on the weekend, right?
Yeah, it's like I think for me it's more like I was more thinking like arena, where it's like, okay, I'm gonna attack for you know, it's like, oh, I knew that I could have played around settle the wreckage if I had wanted to, right? And I didn't, or something like that, right? Or do I play around settle the wreckage, or do I play around you know, some single target removal spell? And then in hindsight, you know, you look back and it's like, well, they had the single target removal spell and decided to play around settle the wreckage, but then, you know, in your post-mortem analysis, you're like, well, actually, you know, in game one, you know, there's only, you know, 2 settle the wreckages in their deck, whereas there's, you know, 4 copies of the single target removal spell. Yeah. And so you should have gone, the proper play was to play around the single target removal, or that's what.
But yeah, it's like the core learning here is that like not everything, like you can't write off everything that you did in a winning game as correct just because it worked out, and then you also, or like not even in a winning, but like in a winning situation, or in a positive situation as like the right choices because it worked out. And you also shouldn't write off everything that happened in a bad situation as like something that was incorrect just because it didn't work out, which is actually the bigger one in my opinion a lot of the time, is that like people will introduce changes to their gameplay because a play went wrong when it was not expected to go wrong, and it was like statistically the correct decision, or the you still made the correct play, it just didn't turn out well. And it's sort of like it's good to be able to recognize those situations and just reaffirm that like, yeah, I would still make this play again, even though it didn't go my way this time.
Is it Star Trek with the it is possible to commit no errors and yet still lose?
Yeah,
that's the
okay.
I'm not a Trekkie.
There are no mistakes.
It's the what is it it's the simulation where you're
the holodeck,
Kobayashi.
The Kobayashi Maru. Yeah, there you go.
Wow. Okay. Well, after that Star Trek reference, that about wraps it up for this episode. If you guys would like to reach out to us with any questions, comments, or concerns, you can contact us on Twitter at Into the North Pod, via our email intothenorthpodcast@gmail.com, or on our Discord server, the invite link for which can be found in the description for this episode. An extra special thanks to all of our patrons who help cover the expenses for our show and allow us to work towards improving the quality of the podcast. If you too would like to become a patron, we are at patreon.com/intothenorthpodcast. Another way you can support us is via our TCG Player affiliate link. So anytime you want to purchase something from TCG Player, if you use our affiliate link, which is in the podcast/YouTube description, a portion of your purchase goes towards supporting the podcast. Thank you as always to the band Vox Cadre for lovely podcast music, to Nate Slover for our equally lovely podcast logo, and to our video editor Manta Ray Hat. Next episode will be out in 2 weeks. Until then, see ya.